Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. A loud explosion could be heard from within the resting area. The explosion sound came from the heads of the Soul Engineers. All their heads had exploded from Huo Yuhao's spiritual blast. At this very instant, all 50 Soul Engineers who were resting in the resting area had been killed. It was only now that the whole camp started to react to what had just happened. The linked soul tools started to establish a defensive barrier to cordon the area off from the rest of the world. It was a logical move for them to contain the intruders since there were only 2 people. Based on their calculations, it should be relatively easy to capture or kill them. Little did they expect their enemies to be so powerful. After unleashing a spiritual blast, Huo Yuhao did not wait around. He grabbed Tang Wutong and flickered around the camp like a ghost. There were many defensive soul tools within the camp, which were specially designed to fight against intruders. They shot several laser beams towards Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong, but they just couldn't hit the couple who were flickering around in the camp. Huo Yuhao was not only capable of predicting where the beams would go because of his spiritual detection ability, but was also a Class 9 soul engineer. He had long discovered the flaws in the arrangements of these soul tools. The biggest problem with these defensive soul tools was how they were arranged in a way so as to minimize damage to the soul tools within the camp. On top of this, their power was limited to protect the soldiers. This resulted in countless blind spots, which Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong gladly took advantage of. With his spiritual blast as a continuous ranged attacks, Huo Yuhao was able to unleash his powerful attacks without even seeing the soul engineers. The most powerful soul engineer among them was only a 7-ringed soul sage. Their self-defense soul tools were mainly focused on protecting against attacks, which were physical or soul power based. Not everyone could be equipped with high-class soul tools, which could protect them against spiritual attacks. Other than the 7-ringed soul sage, which required Huo Yuhao to kill him with spiritual shock, the rest of them perished under Huo Yuhao's spiritual blast. Spiritual attacks were no doubt the most effective way to kill soul engineers. It took them only a couple of minutes to kill all of them. In the end, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were the only ones still alive within the camp. Following which, Huo Yuhao entered the core area of the camp and shut down the linked defensive system with the help of his understanding of soul tools as a Class 9 soul engineer. The soldiers who were camped outside had already erupted into chaos. However, they did not dare to enter the area where the soul tools were stationed after the linked defensive system had vanished. The soul engineers in the camp were held in great esteem by the soldiers. Besides, there were already orders given to not enter the area unless they were given permission by the soul engineers. One must understand that any of the soul engineers would have a higher rank than the commanders amongst the soldiers. Soul engineers had extremely high social statuses in the Sun Moon Empire. After completing their sabotage work, Huo Yuhao concealed himself and Tang Wutong as they snuck out of the area where the soul tools were stationed. Following which, they accelerated through the air with their Class 9 flying soul tools and returned to where they had hidden the heavy artillery soul engineer legion. #1 to number 12, listen carefully. I want you to lock onto the coordinates that my spiritual energy is pointing at. Change your shells to Class 4 shells and get ready. Because Huo Yuhao's voice was projected with his spiritual energy, every single soul engineer in the Legion could hear his words clearly. At the same time, Huo Yuhao also informed his companions within the spectral demiplane. Following which, the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion and the Fort Soul Engineer Legion started to move out from the black doors and line up in their formations quickly. Huo Yuhao's eyes were radiating a certain glow as he used his spiritual energy to keep the doors open, lock onto the position of the aerial surveillance soul tools, and fix the coordinates for the artillery with his spiritual sharing ability. He was capable of multitasking and had fully exhibited the importance of his spiritual energy in war. Huo Yuhao gazed into the distance as a smile escaped from the corner of his mouth. Following which, 20 of the 300 Juga divine crossbow cannons started to take aim after receiving the coordinates from Huo Yuhao's spiritual sharing. At this very instant, Huo Yuhao was like their eyes. The long black metallic barrels began their adjustments as they aimed towards the distant sky. After repeated improvements, the current cannons were far more accurate than before. The earliest versions of the cannons had 48 barrels. Because they required 16 barrels for every shot, they could fire 3 times consecutively. Afterwards, they would have to be set aside to cool before they could be used again. Now, regardless of whether it was their cooling mechanisms or their material, the cannons had improved tremendously, and could sustain extended periods of continuous firing. The 16 barrels used to only be able to fire in a single direction. However, after Xianzuan improved its design, it was now able to aim in a single direction with just 2 barrels. This would allow the cannon to be a lot more accurate in its firing. Fire! Huo Yuhao ordered. At that instant, 20 Zhuge divine crossbow cannons fired in unison with a deafening belch. 320 Class 4 shells ascended into the air instantly as they headed in the direction of the distant sky. He Kai-tu was standing by Huo Yuhao's side as he grabbed his own chest. The mere thought of the cost of these shells made his heart ache. Those were all stationary soul cannon shells. Even though Huo Yuhao's newly researched manufacturing technique had helped to reduce the cost of producing these shells, it still cost a small fortune to launch a few hundred shells at once. Huo Yuhao turned his head and smiled at He Kai-tu. He said, "Senior brother, don't worry about it. We will not be taking a loss. Those aerial surveillance soul tools have the ability to dodge attacks. If we were to scrimp on the shells, they might not be enough to destroy them." While they were speaking, a deafening explosion could be heard from the distant sky. Several balls of fire could be seen in the background. Because it was the middle of the day, the fireballs were not too obvious. However, it was still apparent enough that the balls of fire were not just timed explosions. "We hit them." He Kai-tu waved his fist in excitement. Huo Yuhao nodded and said, "We have managed to clear all 100 aerial surveillance soul tools in the vicinity. Senior brother, lead the 4th Soul Engineer Legion to clear up the camp I have just returned from. I have left plenty of spoils for you there." The aerial surveillance soul tools were useless to Huo Yuhao. They were of no use for the mission he was leading. In fact, Huo Yuhao was probably better than all those soul tools when it came to surveillance and reconnaissance work. However, the soul tools in the camp were different. They were all high-quality heavy weapons, the fruits of the labor and research the Sun Moon Empire had done. In fact, such areas would usually contain precious resources like the sealed milk bottles. They should also have plenty of stationary soul cannon shells. Even if this area did not have the strongest soul tools, they should still have an abundance of resources. After hearing Huo Yuhao's words, He Kai-tu immediately understood what he meant. Following which, he joyfully led the 4th Soul Engineer Legion to collect their spoils. However, it was not just him who headed out. Bei was also moving out with the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion. Even though the 3 legions had trained for a long period of time, they had still not fought any battles in their capacity as soul engineers. Since this was already a sure victory for them, it would be good for them to go out and experience fighting. It would also be a good way for them to improve their capabilities. The outcome was one which everyone had long expected. There was no other possible outcome when 5,000 normal foot soldiers met 2 soul engineer legions. Under the instructions of He Kai-tu and Bei, the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion and the 4th Soul Engineer Legion only used non-stationary soul cannon shells, soul rays, and similar expendable items to finish the soldiers off. The entire battle took less than 20 minutes, and the entire army of 5,000 soldiers was obliterated. Without the protection of soul tools, these soldiers had pretty much no capabilities on the battlefield. While they were destroying the soldiers and collecting the spoils, Huo Yuhao had already ordered his heavy artillery Soul Engineer Legion to return into the spectral demiplane. It was best for them to return first, since they were the slowest legion. After they had returned, it would be easier for Huo Yuhao to make his next move. Even though it was fairly tedious to disassemble the heavy weapons, the Legion of Soul Engineers found it relatively easy with the help of the all-terrain self-driving forts. They first began to clear up the leftover supplies, before disassembling the heavy soul tools. Huo Yuhao grabbed Tang Wutong as both of them floated in mid-air. Huo Yuhao was observing the disassembly process, while using his spiritual energy to detect any enemy movement in the distance. Tang Wutong smiled. Seems like it isn't too difficult to deal with the Sun Moon Empire. Huo Yuhao replied, this is but the start. Besides, the explosions in the air earlier must have alerted the other nearby camps. Their assistance is probably late, because of the precautionary measures they have to take and the long distance from their camps to this one. We must leave the moment I detect any movement from them. Tang Wutong asked, then what do we do with the equipment we can't bring along with us in time? Huo Yuhao smiled before replying, we will of course destroy it. We can't leave it behind for them to use. Tang Wutong said, even if their reinforcements were to arrive, they would probably lose to us too. Logically speaking, the Sun Moon Empire would not set up their soul tool camps with overlapping ranges. Hence, if the other camps can't reach the area here, their soul engineers would have no chance against us. Huo Yuhao shook his head and said, no, we can't assume all of that. Firstly, we can't afford to lose anyone. We only have this number of people. Hence, I cannot risk any of their lives. Not even a single one of them. I would rather we lose out on some of the spoils than give the enemy a chance to deal damage to us. Besides, there is also the possibility of us getting tangled in the combat and losing the chance to retreat. This is near the front line, so there must be plenty of troops from the Sun Moon Empire around. Once we get caught in battle, our plan will have failed. Hence, we must strike and leave immediately. We must make sure no one knows the profile of our army. The unknown enemy is often the scariest enemy. Our main goal is to exert pressure on the Sun Moon Empire. Oh. They are here. Huo Yuhao solemnly gave the signal to begin retreating. The fellows from Tang's sect had spent so much time together. Because Huo Yuhao had been the main control-type soul master all along, they reacted according to his warnings without any hesitation. After taking everything they had dismantled, the all-terrain self-driving forts started to shoot soul rays at the soul tools, which they were unable to take with them. In a short amount of time, they transformed the soul tool camp into ruins. In the meantime, Huo Yuhao took his leave with Tang Wutong as they returned to the forest to look after the spectral gate. Even though the all-terrain self-driving forts could not move as fast as the Tang sect Soul Engineer Legion, which was in flight, they were not much slower than them. From the air, the forts were basically gigantic metallic balls running at an incredibly fast speed with their 8 long legs. No terrain could stop them from advancing. Before long, they were all out of sight. When the Sun Moon Empire's reinforcements arrived, all they would see was the rubble. After entering the forest, the forts disappeared into the black doors. With the experience they had gained from their previous entrance, they were a lot faster this time around. As the 9 doors closed, everything became as serene as before. It was almost as though the legions had not appeared at all. Huo Yuhao had gone into the spectral demiplane along with the rest of them. Even though he was formally trained in military tactics in the ultimate soldier plan, what he had learned was primarily individual-based tactics. When it came to controlling a large number of troops, he knew he could not be compared to Zhu Zi. However, the gap between him and her was not insurmountable. He believed that he was able to do so with the help of his powerful abilities and his spectral demiplane. This was apparent from the ease with which they were able to win the previous battle and retreat upon attaining victory. However, he still believed in the need to reflect and review what they had done well and what they could improve on. This was necessary for them in order to perform better during subsequent battles. As everyone gathered at the top of a knoll within the spectral demiplane, everyone could see the excitement written on each other's faces. This was not only Huo Yuhao's first time leading troops, but also Tang sect's first time fighting in a battle. All 3 Soul Engineer Legions had participated and showcased their different abilities on the battlefield. In fact, they were not able to showcase their full suite of capabilities because of how weak their opponent was. Nevertheless, the destruction they had caused and the resources they had looted had given the team's morale a huge boost. When they left the Tang sect for this mission, Huo Yuhao had ordered them to bring only 10 days of rations. Much of their storage space had been used to bring resources, which would be useful for actual combat. His objective was simple. He wanted to use the loot from their previous battles as their resources for the next battle. They had managed to plunder a huge amount of rations from the Sun Moon Empire in their previous battle. These rations would be enough to last them for an extended period of time. In addition, they were also able to acquire several different kinds of soul tools. Those they were unable to bring away in time were completely destroyed. The Sun Moon Empire had definitely suffered a huge loss. Yuhao, that was truly an incredible battle. If we keep this up, we're going to be rich. What's our next target? Are we going to focus on the next area where the soul tools are stationed? If we can destroy all of these areas established by the Sun Moon Empire outside of the Mingdo mountain range, I'm sure we can strike fear deep into the heart of the Sun Moon Empire. At the same time, the Star Luo Empire would be able to help us occupy their attention from the other end. He Kaitu was undoubtedly one of the most excited individuals among the rest. He had obviously forgotten his unhappiness with the generous usage of the stationary soul cannon shells. As he was the main person in charge of logistics and supplies, he was now feeling like a wealthy man. Huo Yuhao shook his head and said, "No, we have not come here to attack such installations. Even though we do have the power to destroy all of these installed soul tools, that would undoubtedly expose our existence. Besides, I am sure the Sun Moon Empire has its means to counter these scenarios. If we were to be overly absorbed in these battles, we would definitely lose at some point in time. Because of how small our unit is, we cannot afford to lose anyone. Hence, we must not give them a chance to catch us. We must retreat quickly right after striking them. And we must do it in a clean and quick fashion." He Kaitu was surprised by Huo Yuhao's reply. "So we're giving up on this battlefield? We're not continuing?" Huo Yuhao nodded and said, "We need to adopt a macro perspective. Our intent is to influence the entire war, not just any small plot of land. Our biggest advantage is our speed. By ferrying everyone in the spectral demiplane, I can bring everyone to any corner of the Sun Moon Empire within 2 days. Hence, our best strategy is to strike them in different parts of their empire. It would be a losing battle for us if we were to fight head-on with them." Bei nodded in agreement. Little junior brother is right. We cannot be overly content with our small victories. We need to stretch the battlefield across the entire Sun Moon Empire in order for them to feel the pain that we are about to deliver to them. We must make them panic by striking their most vulnerable parts. This will allow us to create the greatest amount of opportunity, and at the same time, give them the greatest amount of fear. As long as we can affect the foundation of their empire and threaten their rule, we would have accomplished our objective. Shu Sancha said, "Yuhao, you are our chief commander. Everyone here is a member of our family. There's no need for you to be overly courteous. Just let us know where you want us to head to, and we will follow your orders without any complaints. Let's give the Sun Moon Empire a lesson, and show them what happens when they mess with us." Huo Yuhao revealed a faint smile. "We should all rest up first and recover what we have expended earlier. I will also be resting for a short while before setting off for our next location. This time around, I want to play a game of chess against the Sun Moon Empire. I want them to receive news that their entire empire is being attacked at multiple places, at the same time." Even though Huo Yuhao had expended quite a bit of his energy, it was not overly significant. He went to cultivate with Tang Wutong, whereas the others went for meetings with the higher-ups within their legions to perform after-action reviews. In the Heavenly Soul Empire, Zhu Zi was floating in mid-air silently, while being surrounded by a sea of fiery red. The Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion was stationed around her as they looked to protect from any harm. As she looked into the distance, it seemed as though her mind had drifted away. It had been a while since the entire army had moved out. However, Zhu Zi was still feeling very uneasy. The reason for her unease was simple, it was because of that person. If her child was still unfound, she would perhaps not be as conflicted as she was right now. She would only feel enraged, and would channel the hatred within her into bloodlust as her troops stormed forward onto the battlefield. But now that her child had been returned to her, the hatred in her heart had become a lot fainter. Her child's return had resulted in an inexplicable change in her attitude. In fact, this newfound feeling was slowly taking over the deep hatred in her heart. And this feeling was directed towards her child, definitely not towards her husband. Other than the child, the rest of her feelings was directed towards that person. That day, after Huo Yuhao had left, Juzi had cried for a long time. It was only after she had calmed down that she thought of this. He did not disappoint me. In her heart, Huo Yuhao's image was becoming better, whereas Xu Qianran's was worsening. Nonetheless, Juzi continued to lead the army out for their conquest. She left her child in the palace, because she was not allowed to bring the crown prince of a country out from Radiant City. The truth was that when she was requesting that liberty from Xu Qianran, she was still hopeful that she might be given permission to bring him out. In fact, it was more like she was trying to convince herself to give Xu Qianran one last chance. Unfortunately, Xu Qianran turned her down resolutely. And this made Juzi certain about the decision she was about to make. In her mind, a perfect plan was gradually taking shape. Yuhao, where are you now? Will you be in the enemy's camp? I really don't want to see you on the battlefield. But I really miss you. A bitter expression formed on her delicate face. She was suffering from the conflict within her heart. But at the same time, she was excited by the possibilities which lay ahead. She started to laugh at herself. Back then, I even told him that his biggest problem was his emotional weakness. But why do I feel an inexplicable weakness in my heart whenever I think of him? Yuhao, oh, Yuhao. I am really regretting my decision in the past. If I had chosen you back then, and followed you to leave Radiant City, everything might have turned out differently. At the very least, I would have had a chance to fight for a place by your side. However, she understood that there was not much point crying over spilled milk. There was no way she could undo what she had done after choosing to take this path. All she could do was try and make things easier for him. Huo Yuhao, you can rest assured that I will never hurt you regardless of the circumstances. Because you are my... As she thought about this, Juzi's heart softened once again. Right now, she did not resemble a war god empress. She was more like a young girl who was thinking about her boyfriend. Issue my orders. Everyone is to rest for the next 3 days. Set up the defensive soul tools and be on high alert. Double the range of the aerial surveillance soul tools and push them forward by 1,000 meters. I want more visuals on the situation of the Heavenly Soul and Douling empires. Roger. After the crown prince was returned, Xu Qianran had given at least half of the army to Juzi. In the current campaign, there were only a few Class 9 soul engineers who could influence her tactics. The position of the commander of the 3 forces was slowly becoming hers. The war must go on. In Juzi's heart, she knew it was impossible for her to let go of the hatred she had. In addition, she was no longer only fighting the war as a form of revenge. She was also building the foundation for her son's throne. When it came to this, Xu Qianran had made several good predictions. He knew that he was infertile, and only had the crown prince as his son. Regardless of how big the future of the Sun Moon Empire would be, it was ultimately going to be handed over to Xu Yunhan. That was why Xu Qianran was so daring to put so much power into Juzi's hands. Of course, he was also confident in his ability to rein her in. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were flying across the sky with their hands interlocked with one another. After waking up from his cultivation and returning to that little forest, he realized how a large part of the sky above him was already covered by aerial surveillance soul tools. After the area where the soul tools were stationed had been destroyed, it had alerted all of the Sun Moon Empire's troops, which were stationed near the Mingdo mountain range. They were currently doing their best to find where their enemies were. This showed that Huo Yuhao's previous worries were legitimate. It was definitely not a wise decision to fight head-on with the large number of troops the Sun Moon Empire had stationed in this area. After activating imitation, Huo Yuhao concealed both himself and Tang Wutong as they fled at the speed of sound with their Class 9 flying soul tools at full throttle. The aerial surveillance soul tools were useless against Huo Yuhao. The Sun Moon Empire had spent several days trying to find this mysterious unit, which had attacked them, but to no avail. The only news they had received was how a large legion of all-terrain self-driving forts had attacked them. During the battle, Huo Yuhao and his people did not kill everyone. After all, there were close to 5,000 normal soldiers there. They had only planned to disrupt their operations and flee. They did not want to do any unnecessary killing. Without any other clues, this battle in which the Sun Moon Empire suffered huge losses could only be concluded as an unsolvable mystery. The news was delivered to Radiant City as soon as possible. Oak City was a mid-sized city in the northern part of the Sun Moon Empire. It was very close to the northern frontier. However, it was different from the frontiers of the original Doluo continent. The Sun Moon Empire was surrounded by the ocean on its northern border. It bordered the Ice Sea, the expansive sea, which was on the west of the core regions of the extreme north. Even though it was called the Ice Sea, the sea was not actually frozen entirely. This name was merely given to it because of its incredibly low temperatures. Because of how low the temperature was, there were always blocks of ice floating on the surface of the water. Occasionally, one might even see an entire iceberg floating in the ocean. The weather at the Ice Sea was truly unbearable. Oak City might just be a mid-sized city, but it was already incredibly large considering how few cities there were in the northern parts of the Sun Moon Empire. It was the center of commerce in the northern regions. Many specialties of the north were traded in Oak City before being transported to the southern parts of the Sun Moon Empire for sale. Some of these northern specialties included the fish in the Ice Sea. These fish were extremely popular among its people. The northern regions had a much lower population density than the southern parts of the Sun Moon Empire. Because this place was also very close to the west, it was considerably far from the wasteland of the extreme north, and was often considered the safest place in the Sun Moon Empire. Hence, there weren't many troops stationed here. Only 1,000 troops or so were in charge of the safety of Oak City, as well as some of the smaller cities in the vicinity. There were two figures, which were silently standing on the top of a hill about 50 kilometers away from Oak City. They were looking at the city, which was uniformly gray in color. Oak City was extremely close to the Ice Sea. It was only about 25 kilometers away. Hence, it was possible to look at the Ice Sea by finding a vantage point at a higher altitude. What a great view! It's really different from what we're used to back where we stay. Huo Yuhao exclaimed. Tang Wutong wrapped her arm around Huo Yuhao's arm before exclaiming, "Yeah. Look at the Ice Sea in the distance. It looks so mysterious. I really want to check that place out if we have time. There must be many soul beasts in the Ice Sea. I wonder how strong they are. They must be pretty strong in order to survive under such harsh conditions." Huo Yuhao began to laugh as he listened to her. The extreme north's environment was a lot more brutal than this place, but several of its most powerful soul beasts ultimately became his spirits. He was only able to achieve his current strength because of his ultimate ice. Huo Yuhao was like a fish in water in this extremely chilly northern region. He had absolute faith that he could rely on his own strength to fight at a title Doluo's level. The environment's impact on his strength was very evident. When everything settles down, I will take you to every corner of the Doluo continent. Hi, speaking of that, I feel really dejected. I'm supposed to meet your father when I return, but I don't know how long this delay is going to take. Tang Wutong giggled and said, "Are you worried? Do you think we still have time to get married with the current situation in the continent?" Huo Yuhao chuckled and said, "Even if we don't get married, I will ask your father after consulting him to remove that seal from your body. At the very least, I don't have to be so agonizingly stifled." Tang Wutong blushed. "Just control yourself and stop being so talkative. When do we start? The temperature here is too low, and not conducive for a prolonged battle. We should end it as quickly as possible. Haven't we just scouted? Oak City almost has no ability to resist at all, so we're just going to pillage it. We will leave immediately after the mission. Second senior brother should be prepared. Then let's begin." Tang Wutong nodded as she spoke. "All right." Huo Yuhao's expression grew solemn as deep incantations rang out on the mountaintop. There were no aerial surveillance soul tools in a place like this. Large black doors opened, and enormous metal spheres strode out from those doors as they formed up neatly beneath the little mountain. Every metal sphere was like a porcupine, and all sorts of offensive soul tools, shaped like spikes long and short, protruded from their surface. Hikaitu was sitting in the largest all-terrain self-driving fort, and he was the first to walk out. Only he and Xiao Xiao were sitting inside. Hikaitu came beside Huo Yuhao, and the self-driving fort paused as Hikaitu's voice echoed from within. Yuhao, Wutong, do you guys want to come in and sit down? All right, Huo Yuhao acknowledged. Attacking Oak City wouldn't be very difficult, so they had only mobilized the Fort Soul Engineer Legion. Huo Yuhao didn't have to be too involved. He only had to control the situation with his spiritual detection, and that was sufficient. Huo Yuhao's reputation among the 3 Soul Engineer Legions became greatly elevated after their battle the other day. Anyone who experienced how magical his spiritual detection was would be shaken by that formidable ability of his, whether they were Soul Masters or Soul Engineers. Hikaitu had crafted this Class 8 all-terrain self-driving fort himself. It was bright silver in color, but 5 meters in diameter. He enjoyed all kinds of high-powered soul tools, so he had installed many different kinds of frighteningly destructive soul tools into his soul tool fort. This soul tool fort rivaled the strength of a Class 9 soul tool if Hikaitu used his full strength to attack. The reason why it was a Class 8 soul tool was because the fort didn't contain a single soul tool installed that could reach the attacking force of a Class 9 soul tool. There were 6 seats installed inside. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong entered from the metal door at the back, but the fort still felt very spacious and comfortable. Huo Yuhao glanced Hikaitu and Xiao Xiao, who were sitting on enormous chairs in the front, and he laughed as he said, "You know how to take care of yourself, second senior brother." Hikaitu turned around and laughed. "It's always better to be a little more comfortable. How are we doing this?" Huo Yuhao's eyes sparkled. Oak City almost doesn't have any kind of defensive capabilities at all, so we can just force our way forward. I've already scouted around. They mainly store food in their granaries and resource storage units, so we should target those places. There's a treasury among their resource warehouses, so we'll retreat after cleaning out their granaries and that treasury. We will try to avoid hurting civilians as much as possible. We're not here to kill. All right, don't worry. Let's move out, boys. Our target is the city 50 kilometers in front of us, and we are to do as much damage as we wish to its structures. But we have to minimize hurting people as much as possible. Hikaitu used his group communicator to give an order to every one of the Soul Engineer Legion's members. His Soul Engineer Legion was the largest one, with 1,500 members. There were 5 people in each all-terrain self-driving fort, and each individual controlled different functions within them. Someone would be responsible for movement, while other people would be responsible for offense and defense, and 2 others were responsible for infusing soul power into the fort. All 5 individuals had to be adept at all their tasks, so that they could switch around at any moment. That way, their all-terrain self-driving fort's functions could be realized as much as possible while maintaining continuous endurance and usage. Hikaitu controlled his all-terrain self-driving fort and strode at lightning speed toward Oak City. The others got into formation and followed behind him as they charged straight forward. They tried to keep some space between each other in their formation as they pushed forward so that their firepower wouldn't overlap. They moved forward in an orderly fashion, and even though their formation wasn't considered entirely strict and flawless, it was absolutely reasonable. They had been training for more than 2 years, and their standards from their training were adequately displayed. 50 kilometers was barely an hour's journey for all-terrain self-driving forts. The reason why Huo Yuhao didn't choose to use his necromancy nearer to Oak City, because there was still aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky. What he wanted to achieve was for the Sun Moon Empire to be confused about where this army had come from. They would be warned if Huo Yuhao destroyed their aerial surveillance soul tools beforehand. Oak City's defenses were lax, but if they were given warning early enough, cities which were relatively close by could still send reinforcements. Furthermore, the Sun Moon Empire could use backup aerial surveillance Seoul tools when Huo Yuhao was using necromancy, and they would then discover where this mysterious army had come from. This was what Huo Yuhao wanted least, so he had to be careful in dealing with their defenses. Huo Yuhao wanted to use these battles to boost their Soul Engineer Legion's adaptability at the same time, so he didn't have to go through so much trouble. It was time for them to exercise and move around after being stuck in his spectral demoplane for a day. The patrolling soldiers on Oak City's wall were wrapped in thick blankets, because the weather was too cold. They would circle for a round or two before hiding from the wind behind the battlements. The patrolling teams switched every hour, and every team only had 10 people. Patrols would sometimes even be cancelled during the coldest days of winter. At this moment, 10 soldiers from the City Defense Army's 1st Large Team's 3rd Small Team were patrolling on the city wall. 10 soldiers strolled around lackadaisically on top of the city wall under their vice-captain's leadership. "Why don't we talk to boss about this damned weather, Captain? We don't have to patrol anymore. There's nothing to see," an old soldier complained to his vice-captain. The vice-captain snapped, "If you have the guts to do it yourself, then do it. The captain's mood hasn't been so good these few days. Hey, I've heard that the team captain has gone out in search of new experiences, but he was discovered by his wife. Is that true? You shouldn't ask if you don't wish to be burned alive by the captain's wrath." Everyone guffawed along with tacit mutual understanding. "Captain, we want to pool our money to buy a drink of wine for you after our patrol is finished. What do you think? A drink? I'm on duty today, so." "Captain, the weather is so cold. Drinking some wine will help you execute your duties better." "Yes, all right. At least you fellows are filial." What's that sound?" "TCH, TCH, 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 TCH. Strange sounds traveled from the distance as the patrol gazed out from the city. It was but a glance before all 10 pairs of pupils contracted at the same time. There were enormous metal spheres in the distance wherever their eyes could see. They didn't have enough sunlight, but these metal spheres were still reflecting icy brilliance as they charged towards Oak City at lightning speed. The vice-captain froze for a few moments before he yelled hysterically, "Ambush! Close the city gates, quick!" These soldiers were a little idle and slack, but seeing an attack of such scale sent chills straight into their hearts. They were in the Sun Moon Empire's territory after all. Even though they were far in the north, these soldiers still had some understanding of soul tools. These soldiers knew that they couldn't defend themselves against an attack from an enormous Soul Engineer Legion of such a scale. What they could do now was to call the soldiers below to close the city gates before they would run. The spherical all-terrain self-driving fort at the forefront suddenly flipped as it turned its belly forward and revealed an enormous cannon barrel that was 1.5 meters in diameter. The barrel itself wasn't long, but when it flipped around, the opening flashed with freakish red light. This all-terrain self-driving fort was still roughly 2 kilometers from Oak City, but in the next moment, a radiant beam of red light blasted from that frightening muzzle as it cut across 2 kilometers in an instant and smashed heavily against the closed city gates. Boom, boom, boom. Deafening booming sounds resonated across Oak City as the city's gates were blown to dust. Countless pieces and fragments were blown in all directions as several tens of meters of the city wall on both sides of the city gates collapsed. An enormous hole was blown right through the city gates. Self-driving forts moving at full speed could cover 2 kilometers in the blink of an eye. The Fort Soul Engineer Legion that was spread out horizontally charged into the city gates. This video will end here.